so today we are going to be talking about how old bread is. And we're going to be taking a look at a site called Shabeka 1, which is it's in Jordan. And so in order to get to Jordan, we have to go into the Mediterranean Sea, and then, sorry, wrong button there. I'm trying to figure out this system. Sorry about this. There we go. Now I've got my slides up there, or my map up there. In order to get to the site in Shabeka 1, we are going to go into the Mediterranean Sea and all the way to the far eastern side, and then we'll see Israel and Jordan here. And if we come in, here's Jordan here, and the Shabeka 1 site is in this region here somewhere in what they call the Black Desert. So somewhere in this region. I wasn't able to get the exact coordinates of it. And so in that region there's a pit, and I think I've got that pit on my slides here. And it's a fire pit that was built 14,400 years ago. Years ago, this fire pit was built, and in that fire pit they would obviously have a fire, and they would, once the fire had died down a little bit, they would take a mixture of whatever grain they happened to have, along with some nuts and tubers. They would mix it with bread and make a flat bread that they would cook in the charcoal there. And the archaeologists, when they excavated this pit, they found 642 small lumps of charred food. And 22 of them from this pit, they've actually excavated 2 pits, and 22 of the charred bits of food from this pit were actually bread-like substances, is how they describe it. Basically, it's unleavened bread. And bread is extremely difficult to find in the archaeological record because it's tiny. We're talking tiny little breadcrumbs. These breadcrumbs, some of them are just a few millimeters across. So these are tiny little crumbs that they were able to find by doing a process called dry sifting. So for dry sifting, what you do is you take a sifter like you might use in your kitchen, except much bigger, and you put the remains, in this case from the fire pit, through that sieve. And the dirt that filters through, you may process, but it would be a different process. But what you're looking for is anything that doesn't quite go through that sieve. And then they were able to find these really tiny, little itty-bitty pieces of grain, and were able to examine it and find out that yes, this is bread we're talking about here. And the question is, why? Why did they make this bread? And there are a few different theories as to why they may have made the bread. They may have made it for ceremonial purposes, such as some sort of big event they're having, so they need some sort of just celebration in order to kind of say yay type thing. It also could be that they were showing off. That maybe there was a guest tribe visiting them, so they were showing off, hey, look at all this cool stuff that we can produce here. And hey, here, try it. Try this cool bread. Another theory is that they were going to travel because this bread can really last for months when it's baked this way. So they may use it for basically a long trip that they are going to take. Maybe they're going out for a hunting party and they keep the bread with them and they go away for months at a time in order to go hunt, and that gives them nutrients that are really easy to process, really easy for them to carry. All right, so our next question is, who are the Natufians? So the Natufians are the people that actually were what we call the people that probably made this bread. So the Natufians are a group of people who lived in basically the Middle East. So what we now call Israel or Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan. And we can see it in this map here, several of the different spaces that they may have lived, or that they did live. These are different excavations that we have found. We do know that they had housing that was most likely both temporary and permanent style of housing. So their housing may have been similar to what was like a teepee that the Native Americans used, and they would have used these for when they're on a hunting expedition. But they will also have another structure, like in those different towns, that are more permanent. Most likely a stone structure that they would have lived in during the probably winter months. But they estimate that they were semi-sedentary, meaning that they stayed in these houses regularly. And these houses could have been there from they could have been in these houses from anywhere to 6 to 12 months out of the year. So they were not in these houses constantly, but they were in these houses periodically. But what about their tools? We know a little bit about their tools. We know that they used a mortar and pestle, which would be used to grind up their food. And we know that they had several other tools that were made from either wood, stone, teeth, bone, all sorts of things like that. They also had these tools that we call a quern, so that stone on the top would turn and there'd be grain that they'd put in between the two stones. So you'd pick up the stone, put some grain in there, set down the top stone, and then you'd turn it. And that would grind the stone up into a really nice grain, basically, that they can use, or a really nice flour that they can use to then make their bread. The bread would be made from various grains. We don't know exactly what they would use, but in the fire pit they found remains of einkorn, which is a type of wheat. They found remains of various different grains. I'm sorry, I lost my place so I lost my notes. They found various different grains in there, including some roots. And some of their grains was actually being made out of, I want to say bulrush, I can't find it in my notes. This root that they would grind up along with the flour and the nuts and seeds in order to make their flour for their bread. They also cared for their dead, which is something similar to what we would do. They would bury their dead just like we would, sometimes in different positions. The positions weren't always the same, but they would care for their dead and bury them. There have been more than 400 different burials that they have found in this area, and they were often carefully arranged, and sometimes they would reopen it to put another loved one in the same grave. Very similar to how we might these days have one spouse dies and then years later the second one is buried next to them. Very similar thing to how the Natufians may have viewed laying a loved one in the same grave as another loved one. The Natufians were named by a woman by the name of Dorothy Gerard, and this is her here. She was actually the first woman to hold a chair in either Oxford or Cambridge College, where she held the Disney Professor of Archaeology at Cambridge. And no, it's not that Disney, different Disney. But she did discover and name the Natufian culture. And for more about her, I am working on a biography about her that I will be doing on one of my channels. Coming up probably next week if I can get everything done. I want to also ask you that if you're enjoying this, please go ahead and give me a thumbs up. And if you're not enjoying it, well, why are you here? All right, but are the Natufians, or is stumble over my words, is bread even older than the Natufians? That is our next question. So yes, bread may be much older than the Natufians. We need three things in order to make bread. We need the tools in order to grind it. We need fire to cook it, and of course we need to be able to collect the grains. For fire, we actually have been controlling fire for a very long time. We see evidence of fire control as early as possibly as early as Homo erectus. We definitely see it very clearly, direct evidence of fire used by humans, fire control by humans by the time that we get to the Neanderthals. But there is some evidence that they may have been here much longer. In order to grind up the grain, we need some sort of tool, such as a mortar or pestle. They make some very large ones and some very small ones, some of wood, some out of stone. And we see these back well before the Natufians, for many thousands, tens of thousands of years before the Natufians. We see tools and the ability to grind the grain. As far as collecting the grain, let's go to another site. This site is, they call it Ohalo 2, and it is pretty close to the same location as the last one that we saw. So we'll zoom in here on that. And it's in this area up here. Here's Israel again, and it's in this area up here, which is called the Sea of Galilee. And Ohalo 2 is on the edge of the Sea of Galilee, right in the Sea of Galilee in the southwest coast. And you're probably saying, if it's in the Sea of Galilee, how did they get to it? And that's a great question. The Sea of Galilee actually went through a very large drought, and they also had done some pumping to get water out of the Sea of Galilee. Didn't They didn't say in the article why they were pumping. I'm assuming it's for agriculture in order to water crops, but I'm not 100% sure why they were pumping it out. But the Ohalo 2 site, it was underwater for 23,000 years before it was uncovered in 1989, and then they were able to work it for about 3 seasons through 91 before it was flooded again, and then they were able to come back in 99 through '01 to work it again when there was another drought. But here they were able to find several small grained grasses that may have been a very important part of the diet of the people of this region. Were they grinding it up? We don't know. We don't know if they were turning it into flour. Were they turning it into bread? Well, if they weren't turning it into flour, we don't know if they were turning it into bread. So it's possible, but we don't know for sure. This is the earliest evidence of what's called small grain as a staple food, but there's actually some evidence of larger grains, such as the wheat that we eat now regularly, being collected much earlier. But one thing to remember is that this is before agriculture. So agriculture didn't start until about 10,000 BC, so about 12,000 years ago, well after any of this, well after the bread was found or was baked by the Natufians, well after the Ohalo 2 site where we find these small grains. So these were not collected by growing a crop of grain and then collecting it like we would nowadays and then working it. This is wild collected grain that was collected and then ground up and turned into bread. I suspect that bread was harvested, was made a whole lot sooner than we see in the archaeological record. My belief is that once something is seen in the archaeological record, it has been there for perhaps thousands of years. In this case, I believe that they had been making bread for thousands of years. But those little crumbs of bread are really hard to find in the archaeological record. Were they destroyed? Were some of the previous digging processes that were done just too much for these very fragile pieces of foodstuffs that were basically found in a fire pit? We don't know. So I do believe that grain is much older. So what do you guys think? What do you think? Could grain be older, or do you think that 14,400 years ago is probably about when it started? All right, so that's all I have for today. Anybody have any questions? Yeah, I think that it's probably a lot older. Like I said, if it's found in the archaeological record, it is probably much older than what we see. That's why I believe, even though we see in the archaeological record that fire was going on during the reign of the Neanderthals, I believe that it was probably sooner, because It's just not something easy to see in the archaeological record. Was the climate very different back then? This was, let's see, 23,000 years ago was kind of the end of, it was a late glacial maximum, I think is what they call it. So we're heading out of kind of an ice age, a mini ice age at this point. And so it was much cooler back then than it is now. The next instance that I know of bread there, I'm sure that there are other like bread-like products that are found, but the major next instance of bread that I know of is actually the Egyptians. And that was, I want to say 5,000 years ago, 3 to 4,000 BC, somewhere in there. We start seeing the Egyptians, and this is actually sourdough bread. This is the bread more like what we're used to seeing when we get to the Egyptians. And this is the first time in the archaeological record or in the historic record that we see sourdough. And that is where so the Natufians made a flat bread, which is no yeast, so no rise in it. It's a very dense bread, probably more good for dunking in your soup than for eating on a sandwich. Whereas by the time we get to the Egyptians, they're using yeast, so the bread is more light. It's got the air bubbles that we're used to seeing in it. It's more of basically it's a sourdough, much like a modern sourdough. And that's when a lot of people thought bread started, was with the Egyptians. Because we don't see much bread in the archaeological record before the Egyptians. Is alcohol and bread making related? Very related. Bread and beer are sisters. The word bread and the word brew are actually cognate, that meaning that they come from the same word. And the long ago ancestor language of English and German and a lot of languages, trying to remember what they're called now. But there is this group of people, and their word for brew and bread were the same word. That's how closely related alcohol and bread is. Basically, their word meant a product made with yeast and grain. So we get, out of that, we get beer and we get bread. They're made very similarly. Any other questions? Indo-European, that's the word. Proto-Indo-Europeans. That's what they were called. They're the ones that have the predecessor language to ours. Thank you guys. I really appreciate you having you here. I hope to next time do Dorothy Gerard, just kind of a continuation of this, get in depth about her and how she discovered the Natufian culture. Thank you guys. You have a great day, and tell all your friends about these live streams because I want to keep doing them, and I'm having a lot of fun with them. And have a great day. I'll see you next time.